Hi makers, I'm Alexandra from Minerva. Today we are going to be working on a sew-along for Simplicity Pattern S9187. This is a relaxed fit lined coat with a shaped collar, sleeve cuffs, and a pocket detail. This pattern is perfect for an intermediate dressmaker. It comes in one size range from double extra small to double extra large. Since it's a coat, some of the fabrics we can use are jacquard, brocade, heavy ponte knits, velveteen, wool, and wool blends. And talking about wool blends, I have such a gorgeous fabric to show you today. But before I tell you about today's fabric, I want to remind you to sign up for a Minerva Craft Club account. You get a discount on all your orders for 12 months. Makers, don't forget to open an account on our website where you can share your makes, get inspiration on fabric for your upcoming projects, follow other makers, watch other sew-along videos, or get ideas from other makers who have made this pattern. So today we are going to be using this absolutely gorgeous, luxurious cashmere wool coating fabric. Sounds pretty amazing, right? That's because it is. This fabric is available on our website in other colors. This cashmere wool coating fabric is a woven heavyweight fabric and perfect for this pattern. Since this pattern is a coat, it is lined. We are also going to be using a woven jacquard lining fabric in pewter silver. This fabric is 100% polyester, which makes it perfect for a lining. We also have this available on our website in different colors. As always, I'm going to be linking the pattern, fabric, and any notions used. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below. All right, makers, let's get started. Hi makers, today we are going to be working on a sew-along for Simplicity S9187. Keep in mind, this pattern comes in one size range, double small to double large. So let me tell you about the pieces that you are going to need. You're going to need pattern piece number 1, and this is the front and under color. You're going to cut 2. You're also going to need pattern piece number 2, and this is the back, and you're going to cut 1 unfold of fabric and cut 1 unfold of lining. You're also going to need pattern piece number 3, and these are the pockets, and you're going to cut 4. You're also going to need pattern piece number 4, and this is the front facing. You're going to cut 2 of fabric, and you're going to cut 2 of interfacing. You're going to need pattern piece number 5, and this is the front lining, and you're going to cut 2. You're also going to need pattern piece number 6, and this is the sleeve, and you're going to cut 2 of fabric and cut 2 of lining. You're also going to need pattern piece number 7, and this is the sleeve cuff. You are going to cut, again, we are doing view A, so we are going to be cutting 4 of fabric, and then we're going to be cutting 2 of interfacing. Makers, you are also going to need 1.8 meters or 2 yards of fusible interfacing. You're also going to need 1 1/4 inch snaps or 30 millimeter. You're also going to need thread, and as always, you can check the box for us to match your thread. Makers, we are making a coat, so we want to make sure that we pre-treat our fabric because we really want to make sure that our coat lasts us a very long time. And for that to happen, we have to make sure that we pre-treat our fabric. I usually like to cut a 5 centimeter square or 1.5 inch square, and I usually just like to test it out before I do that to the entire amount of fabric that I get. So I usually just go ahead and cut this small piece of fabric, and then in my pressing iron, I want to make sure that I have my iron in my highest setting, and most irons have this setting, but what you really want is you want a lot of steam in your iron when you are pre-treating your fabric. So once you do that, you want to keep your iron about an inch to half an inch away from your fabric. You don't want to have the iron just touching the fabric. No, you do not want to have that. You want to have your iron just hovering ever so slightly, but you want to make sure that you're close enough so it's getting that steam. You will see your fabric shrink ever so slightly, especially on a little piece like this, where you can really test it and look at it and see how your fabric shrinks. Once you are happy with how your fabric is behaving, when you test it out, go ahead and do the entire piece of fabric, not just a couple of pieces. And you have to do this before you cut your fabric. So once you pre-treat your fabric, I want you to go ahead and line your pattern pieces. I want you to cut your fabric, and then don't forget to mark your notches. And of course, as always, pay attention to the grain line. All right, makers, let's get started. Makers, now that you have cut your fabric, interfaced your pieces, and of course, marked your dots and made your notches, you are going to grab piece number 1, which is the front and under color, and you are going to stay stitch from that dot. And we really want to stay stitch from this dot, and we want to go about 1.5 inches in both directions, because we want to reinforce this corner area. So let's go ahead and stay stitch from that dot, and then we are going to clip from that corner to that dot. So let me show you what it looks like in the pattern. So I am doing size medium. So again, I want you to reinforce with stay stitching, and then I want you to clip to that dot. I don't want you to go through the stitches. I want you to get close, but again, I don't want you to cut through the stitches. Go ahead and do that now for both left and right sides for piece number 1, which is the front and under color. Go ahead and do that now. Makers, now that we went ahead and did some stay stitching, and I'm going to get it close to the camera so you can see my stay stitching, I'm going to grab a pair of scissors, and I want to clip from that corner as close as possible to my stitches. And again, we reinforce that corner. So go ahead and do that for both pieces number 1. Once you do that, we're going to go ahead and put this off to the side. And we are going to grab piece number 3, which are our pockets. And you have 2 dots. And if you look at the pattern, you have those 2 dots. So I want you to go ahead and reinforce from that dot, go up 1 inch or 2.5 centimeters. And again, from that dot and go down 2.5 centimeters or 1 inch. Again, do the same thing for this bottom dot. And I want you to do that for both the pocket and the pocket facing. So again, do that for the pocket and the pocket facing. That is piece number 3, and you have 4 of these pieces. So go ahead and do that now. Makers, now that we reinforced those dots with stay stitching, I want you to go ahead and grab your pocket and your pocket facing, and with right sides together, I want you to pin at your notch. And then I also want you to pin all those raw edges. And now I want you to stitch from that dot, again, 5/8 inch seam allowance or 1.5 centimeters from this dot to this dot. Don't forget to back stitch at the start and at the end. And then I want you to stitch all the way around, again, 5/8 inch seam allowance, 1.5 centimeters. Don't forget to back stitch at the start and at the end. And I want you to do this for both pieces number 3, for the left and right side. And pieces number 3 are the pocket and the pocket facing. Go ahead and do that now. Makers, now that we stitch all around the pocket and we stitch that from our 2 dots, I want you to go ahead and grab your shears and clip your curves and keep going all the way around. And make sure you are not cutting your stitches. You want to get close, but you do not want to cut your stitches. Once you do this, I want you to grab your shears and I want you to grade your seams. So get really close to that seam. And then the next one, I want you to cut a little bit further away. So again, when you get a little close, I want you to grade your seams. So I want you to grade your seams. Once you do that all the way around, I want you to turn your pocket and I want you to give it a good press. Go ahead and do that now for both left and right pockets. Makers, once you have graded your seams and you are ready to turn your pocket over, I want to make sure that you clip. Again, I want to make sure you don't cut your stitches, but that you get close. And then you turn. Makers, I want you to turn your pocket, and if you need to use a point turner, especially for this little spot at the end, I want to make sure that you do this. And now give this a really good press. Once you press this, I want you to baste from this corner down and from that small corner to the edge. Go ahead and do that for both pockets. Makers, now that you have both pockets pressed and you basted these openings, I want you to grab piece number 1. And you are looking for 2 large dots. And in your pattern, again, make sure that you pick the large dots, not the small ones. So again, you have 2 large dots, and I want you to grab your pocket and I want you to line it. And I want you to pin. And I want to make sure that you match the raw edges. I want you to go ahead and baste on both sides. And once you're done, I want to make sure that you top stitch 1/2 inch or 1.3 centimeters away from the edge. Go slow. You want to make sure that this looks beautiful. So again, go ahead and set your pockets on both the left and right sides of piece number 1. Take your time. Again, you want to make sure you backstitch at the start and at the end. Again, I want you to top stitch 1/2 inch or 1 centimeters away from the edge. Go ahead and do that now. Makers, now that we have attached our pockets, we are going to grab piece number 2, which is our back, and we are going to stay stitch 5/8 inch away from the edge or 1.5 centimeters. And then with right sides together, I want you to attach your shoulders. And I want to make sure that you, well, grab this side. I want to make sure that you match your notches. Right there. And then I want you to pin. So go ahead and stitch 5/8 inch or 1.5 centimeter seam allowance. Don't forget the back stitch at the start and at the end. And then I want you to also attach the sides. And you have another notch right here. So go ahead and stitch 5/8 inch or 1.5 centimeters for your sides and also for your shoulders. And you are going to stop at the dot at your shoulders on piece number 2. You have a dot right here. That's where you're going to stop. Go ahead and do that now. Makers, we went ahead and stitched our shoulders, and I want to make sure that you see I stopped at that dot in the back. And I also press my seams open. So again, when you're pressing your seams, make sure that you put some sort of like a press cloth and that you press, right? And if you don't have a tailor's clapper, that you can always put your hand and just press for, I would say, count to like 5 or 8 and let it go. That will help you keep your seam open. You really want to do this because we are not finishing the seams, because remember, we are going to be aligning this coat. So once you do that for your shoulders and also for your side seams, I want you to grab the center back, and you have a double notch. So I want you to go ahead and pin. So remember, this is going to be right sides together. So go ahead and stitch 5/8 inch seam allowance or 1.5 centimeters. Don't forget the back stitch at the start and at the end. Once you do that, I want you to again press your seams open. Go ahead and do that now. Makers, now that we stitched our center back seam, I want to make sure that you go ahead and press that like I mentioned, and I want you to, with raw edges together, that you go ahead and you pin the front and undercolor, and you have some notches back here, see them? So, and you have some notches in the back. So I want to make sure that you stitch the neck edge right there. And you are going to stitch between the dots. Again, remember that dot on that corner. I'm going to put a pin down here. I'm also going to put a pin down here. So you are going to pin, and then I want you to stitch 5/8 inch seam allowance. Don't forget the back stitch at the start and at the end. And once you're done, I want to make sure that again you press your seams open. So go ahead and do that now. Makers, so we went ahead and stitched. So now I want you to go ahead and clip your curves, and I really want you to do this, and I want you to see this. I want you to clip your curves here, and I want you to trim your seam. And I want you to do that for both bottom and top. And remember, this is going to be wrapped on your neck, so you want to make sure that this is laying flat. So you really want to go ahead and clip those curves. So once you do that, I want you to put this off to the side, and I want you to go ahead and grab your sleeves, And if you ever have trouble thinking of which one's the right side, which one's the wrong side, when I cut my fabric, I usually put a small piece of washi tape. It could be any type of marker, usually something like washi tape, it's easy to remove. And this always tells me that this is the wrong side, especially for sleeves. Sometimes if you're just in the moment of just sewing away and you forget which one's the right side, the wrong side. So now that you've stitched the back neck edge, I want you to go ahead and with right sides together. And again, find your notches at the sleeve, pin, so go ahead and stitch 5/8 inch or 1.5 centimeter. Don't forget to backstitch at the start and at the end. Once you have stitched both of your sleeve sides, I want you to again go ahead and press those seams open. Go ahead and do that now. Makers, I went ahead and stitched the underarms sleeve area, and then I also pressed them. So I'm going to go ahead and put this off to the side, and I want you to grab piece number 7, which are the cuffs, and I want to make sure that you have these interface. You have to interface 2 of the 4 pieces that we cut. So again, you are going to grab with right sides together, find your notches, and I want you to pin. And again, I want you to stitch 5/8 or 1.5 centimeter. Don't forget this back stitch at the start and at the end. Once you do that, I want you to press those seams open. Go ahead and do that for both interface piece number 7, which is the sleeve cuff. Makers, now that we went ahead and stitched and press open our sleeve cuffs, and again, these are the ones that are interface. Those 2 that are interface, we're going to put those off to the side. And now I want you to grab the remaining sleeve cuffs. These are the ones that are not interfaced. And again, with right sides together, mark your notches. And again, pin and stitch 5/8 inch or 1.5 centimeters. And don't forget this back stitch at the start and at the end. And again, go ahead and press your seams open. Go ahead and do that for both sleeve cuffs number 7. These are the pieces that are not interface. Go ahead and do that now. Makers, now that I have my sleeve cuffs, and I want to go ahead now and with right sides together. So I want to go ahead and slip one inside the other, and I want to match my seams. I'm going to pin, again, I want to match my seams. And we are going to stitch the notch edge. So you have a notch. If you look at your cuff, right, it's almost like at a small angle. You have a notch on this side. We are going to be stitching the notch edge. So we really want to make sure that this all matches. And usually what I like to do is match the notch edge first, just so when I go on the other side that things match where they're supposed to do. So I just put a couple of pins on that side, then a couple of pins on this side. But again, I'm not stitching the notch edge where this little notch is at. I'm stitching the unnotched edge. So again, I want to pin. Make sure you are matching those raw edges. So go ahead and stitch the unnotched edge, okay? Again, the side without a notch. And I want you to stitch all the way around 5/8 inch seam allowance or 1.5 centimeters. Don't forget the back stitch at the start and at the end. And it's going to look like this, right? So go ahead and do that now. Makers, now that we stitched in our sleeve cuffs, I want you to trim, because we are going to turn this, but we really don't want any of this bulk. So I want you to trim those seams. Once we do this, we are going to understitch. And again, we want to understitch the facing, so the facing stays towards the inside. Okay, so now we trim this. So again, I want the facing to stay towards the inside. So what I want to do is, and you can give this a press and press your seams towards the facing. Once you do that, I want you to stitch close to the seam, because once we go ahead and turn this, you want to make sure that your facing stays towards the inside. So go ahead and press again, press your seams, press your seams. If we have it like this, press your seams towards the facing, okay? And then you are going to understitch. You're going to understitch that seam towards your facing. Go ahead and do that now. Makers, and again, I went ahead and pressed, I trimmed my seams and about half, right? And then I went ahead and pressed those seams, that seam allowance, towards my facing. Which one's the facing? The facing is going to be closest to your body when we turn this. So again, and the whole point of understitching is we want that facing not to show. So again, press your seams towards the facing. And now I want you to turn this over. Okay, and now we are going to go to our sewing machine, and I'm going to show you how to understitch. Makers, so I have my sleeve cuffs on my sewing machine, and I have the facing towards the left side and the sleeves towards the right side, the sleeve cuffs to the right side. And if you touch right here, as close to the seam, I press my seam allowance towards the facing, again towards the facing. And we do this because we want to make sure that the facing, when we turn this, stays towards the inside. So that's why we are understitching. So go ahead and just get as close to the seam that you stitch these two cuffs together as close as possible, and just stitch. back stitch. So again, now when I turn my cuffs, they are staying, the facing is staying towards the inside. Makers, now that we have our sleeve cuffs done, I also went ahead and basted those raw edges just because as I'm working with it on the sleeve, I don't want it to move on me. So go ahead and baste those raw edges. Again, that is the longest running stitch in your machine. Once you do that, we are going to attach these to the sleeves. So I want you to go ahead and turn them, because you want to do this on the right side. And again, and I want to go ahead and again, I want to match my seams. You have a notch on this side, and you have a notch on the cuff. So make sure that you pin there first, always on those notches. Make sure that you match that raw edge with raw edge. So makers, now I want you to stitch 5/8 inch or 1.5 centimeters all the way around. Don't forget the back stitch at the start and at the end. And then I want you to do a second stitching all the way around, 1/4 inch from your first stitch or 6 millimeters away from that first stitch. So again, first stitch, 5/8 inch or 1.5 centimeters seam allowance all the way around. Don't forget the back stitch at the start and at the end. And then I want you to stitch again, 1/4 inch or 6 millimeters away from the first stitch towards the seam allowance, not towards the sleeve. I want you to stitch again once and then again twice towards the seam allowance. Go ahead and do that now. Makers, now that we got our sleeves done, and remember, you have to stitch at 5/8 or 1.5 centimeter and again at 6 millimeters away from that first seams. So go ahead and do that. And now I want you to go ahead, and what we're going to do is we are going to attach our sleeves to our coat. So I want you with right sides together. And as always, I want to make sure that you match your seams. Very important that you match those seams. Pin. And again, you have one notch, right? One notch, that means the front. And then 2 notches means the back. So if that is not correlating to each other, I want you to go back and make sure that it does. And now, and you also have these dots on your sleeves, right? You have one, and this is my seam here, and then another dot. And then your sleeves also have these dots. So I want to make sure that you match those. One right there. Makers, now that you have your sleeves attached to your jacket, I want to make sure that you stitch 5/8 inch seam allowance or 1.5 centimeters, and then I want you to stitch again 1/8 of an inch away from the first stitch within the seam allowance. And I want you to do this because just like the sleeve cuffs, we want to reinforce the sleeves in the area where we are stitching these together. So go ahead and again and stitch 5/8 inch seam allowance or 1.5 centimeters, and then I want you to stitch again a second time 1/8 of an inch or 3 millimeters away from the first stitch towards the seam allowance. Go ahead and do that now for both sleeves. Makers, now that we went ahead and attached our sleeves, I want you to go ahead and trim your seam allowance from notch to notch, right? As close as possible to the seam. Make sure you do not cut those seams. And then I want you to go ahead and you press your seams. And I want to make sure that you just give it a good press on the seam allowance so it just shrinks in your sleeves in and just kind of sets it in. So go ahead and trim your seams and do this as close as possible to those stitches. And again, make sure you do not cut away your stitches. And that you do this from notch to notch. So go ahead and do this for both of your sleeves. Go ahead and do that now. Makers, now that we went ahead and we trimmed that bottom seam of our sleeves, and we also gave the seam allowance a good press just to shrink in that fullness, we are going to go ahead and put this off to the side, and we are going to grab piece number 4, which is our front and neck facing, and we are going to go ahead and we are going to stay stitch from that dot. Again, you are going to stay stitch, and you are going to stay stitch about 1.5 inches both ways, just like we did with our first piece, and you are going to clip into your corner. Once you do that, I want you to go ahead to ease stitch. So that is the longest running stitch on your machine. It's different from your stay stitching, so make sure that you don't confuse those two. Stay stitching, your normal stitch on your machine, go ahead and stitch to that dot, pivot, and go around about 1.5 inches both ways because we want to reinforce that corner. And then I want you to ease stitch, which is the longest running stitch on your machine, and I want you to ease stitch 5/8 of an inch from the raw edge and 1/4 of an inch or 6 millimeters away from the raw edge. So I want you to do that for both left and right side. And I want to make sure that you go from this end, that you pivot, and that you stop right at that notch. So go ahead and do that now. Makers, now that you stay stitch and you ease stitch, I want to make sure that you grab your shears and that you clip into your corner. Once you do that, and remember, do not clip into your stitches, I want you to grab piece number 5, and with right sides together, I want to make sure that you match your notches. There's one right there. And I want to make sure that you pin. So makers, now I want you to stitch 5/8 inch seam allowance or 1.5 centimeters. Don't forget to back stitch at the start and all the way to the end. And I want you to stop at that dot, and I want to make sure that you back stitch here, and I want to make sure that you reinforce. Once you do that, I want you to press your seam towards the lining. So go ahead and do that now. Makers, now that we went ahead and we stitched our lining to our facing, I want you to go ahead and grab your shears, and I want you to clip right at that dot. And again, I want to make sure that you do not go through your stitches, and go ahead and make sure that you press your lining. Go ahead and do that now. Makers, now that you went ahead and press your lining and your front facing, I want to make sure that you stay stitch on your back lining. This is piece number 2, and I want to make sure you do that 5/8 or 1.5 centimeter away from the neck edge. Go ahead and do that now. Makers, now that you stay stitch the neck edge on piece number 2, this is your back lining. The pattern's also asking us to trim 1 inch or 2.5 centimeters off the bottom edge. And I usually just like to grab a ruler and my rotary cutter and measure 1 inch or 2.5 centimeters and just go ahead and trim. So go ahead and do that now. Go ahead and do that all the length of your lining. Makers, now that we trim the bottom of our back lining, I want you to grab your front facing and your back lining, and you go ahead and mark your notches. You go ahead and you pin. And you are going to stop right at that dot. On the shoulder, pin right there. And you are going to also attach the side seams. So again, find your notches. So now I want you to go ahead and also stitch the sides. And don't forget the back stitch at the start and at the end. So again, grab your front facing and stitch the back lining at the shoulders. Don't forget to mark your notches, pin, and I want you to stop at that dot that we reinforced. Once you have the shoulders done, I want you to go ahead and pin the sides, and I want you to go ahead and also that you stitch 5/8 inch seam allowance or 1.5 centimeters for both shoulders and the sides. Don't forget the back stitch at the start and at the end. Go ahead and do that now. Makers, now that we went ahead and stitched our back lining on the sides and at the shoulders, don't forget to press your lining seams open. And now the pattern is asking you to go ahead and turn up. And remember that we clipped on the facing right on that large dot towards the bottom. So now the pattern's asking you to go ahead and turn up your lower ledge of back lining, and you want to go ahead and press up the lining 1 1/8 inch or 2.8 centimeters. So go ahead and grab your seam gauge, and again, just measure 1 1/8, and you're going to turn it up, press, and then again, press again 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimeter. And then what I want you to do is I want you to stitch as close to that pressed edge and keep going all the way down from one end all the way down to the other end. So go ahead and do that now. Make sure you go slow, because remember, this will be seen from the inside of your coat. So go ahead and do that now. Makers, so I went ahead and stitched that lower edge on my lining. That's how it looks from this back. So now I want you to go ahead and grab your coat, and this is going to look familiar because we just did this for our other coat, like the outside of our coat. So I want you to grab your center back seam, and just like we did, I want you to match your notches, and I want you to pin. And I want you to stitch 5/8 of an inch or 1.5 centimeter. Don't forget the back stitch at the start and at the end. Once you do that, I want you to go ahead and press your seams open. Go ahead and do that now. Makers, so I went ahead and stitched my center back seam and I pressed it. And I also went ahead and clipped right where I had that stay stitching by the neck edge, because I want to stitch my center, that back neck edge. So again, right sides together, match your notches, just like we did before, same exact way. So there. And I want you to pin. And I want you to pin on this side. And again, just like we did before, I want you to stitch 5/8 inch seam allowance or 1.5 centimeter, and I want you to go from that dot to this dot that we reinforced. So again, 5/8 inch seam allowance or 1.5 centimeters. Make sure you back stitch at the start and at the end. And the start and at the end are those dots where we reinforced. And once you do that, I want you to press your seam open. And I also want you to go ahead and clip your curves, because again, this is going to be wrapping around the back of your neck. So we want to make sure that this is laying flat. So go ahead and do that now. Makers, now that I stitched my center back seam and my neck edge, remember I told you to go ahead and press it open. and also trim your seams and clip your curves, because again, this is going to be wrapping on the back of your neck, so you want that to look just stay flat, right? That's how it's gonna look. So now that we got that done, we're gonna put that off to the side, and I want you to grab your sleeve linings, and I want you to, again, with right sides together, I want you to pin, and we are going to be doing the exact same thing. We are going to be stitching 5/8 inch seam allowance. Don't forget the back stitch at the start and at the end, or 1.5 centimeters. Makers, now that we stitched in our sleeves, we are going to go ahead and set in our sleeves, and we're going to do it the same way that we did it with our coat. So make sure that you match that underseam, and again, with right sides together. Make sure you match your notches. Makers, now that we set in our sleeves, go ahead and stitch 5/8 inch or 1.5 centimeter all the way around. Don't forget the back stitch at the start and at the end. And again, make sure that you reinforce with another stitch, just like we did for setting in our sleeves in our coat, 1/4 inch or 6 millimeter away from the raw edge. Makers, now that we attached our sleeves on our lining, I went ahead and we are going to attach the lining to our coat. So with right sides together, match your seam, that center seam, very important as always. And you have 2 notches right there, so you also want to match that. You want to make sure that you are matching your raw edges. So just make sure that you ease it in. Remember, once we turn this coat, the pattern has allowed for a little bit of, right? You have some sort of a bulk from the fabric. So you just have to make sure that you ease that in, but follow your notches. Very important. So again, I pinned all the way down and all the way down to that, that square right there, which it's gonna match with our seam right here from when we attach the facing, the lining to the facing. So now I want you to stitch 5/8 inch or 1.5 centimeter seam allowance, and I want you to start at the middle and the back and work your way to the right and stop right here at that spot. And then again, I want you to start again in the middle, 5/8 inch seam allowance or 1.5 centimeter. Don't forget the back stitch at the start and at the end, and then work your way towards the left. So again, start in the middle and work your way to the right, start in the middle and work your way to the left. Go ahead and do that now. Makers, now that we attached our coat to our lining, I want you to go ahead and make sure that you don't have any puckers or anything before you cut any seam allowances. And then I want you to go ahead and trim your corners, right? For all sides. And then I want you to start at the bottom and I want you to trim your edges, but I want you to trim your edges just like we did with our pockets. So I want you to cut one layer, right? And again, we're doing this, and I'm gonna do it up to here so you can understand. We're doing this so when we turn our coat, we don't have a big bulk of fabric. So we want to grade those seams. So again, cutting one layer and one. So again, right? So, and I'm gonna do this all the way around. So go ahead and trim your seams. Again, you want to layer your seams, right? You don't want to cut them at the same width. So you want to layer your seams. So go ahead and do that now for your coat. And then down here, don't forget to clip your curves and make sure that you do not cut your stitches. So go ahead and do that now. Once we do that, I want you to turn over your coat and I want you to give it a really good press with lots of steam and your tailor clapper. So go ahead and do that now. Makers, now that we turned our jacket and right, you like what you are seeing, and take your time. It took me a good, I would say a good 45 minutes to really press my coat, give it lots of steam, and then get my tailor's clapper and press it down, count to 10, and then just move on to the next spot. If you don't have a tailor's clapper, you can always grab a really heavy book, like a hardcover book, and just put it on top. Just press it down. And what you really want to do is just get those seams flat, right? So once you do that, we are not done. I want you to go ahead and open up your coat, and we need to attach our neck edge. So usually what I like to do is I like to just grab my seams and just get them together and just go ahead and match your seams, right? I'm trying to put this with my pin so you can see where I'm going to be stitching. And again, you want to grab those two seams and you want to stitch. You want to stitch them together. So again, so go ahead and stitch your neck edge. Go slow, and you want to stay along that stitching line that you had when you stitched in your neck edge separately. Now you want to grab both neck edge from the lining and the neck edge from the coat, and you want to attach those. Go ahead and do that now. Makers, now that we attached our neck edge and side, we are going to attach our sleeve lining. So I want to make sure you get your sleeve lining out through one of the cuffs and make sure that your lining is not twisted inside, and you want to fold your lining. And I am holding these two together. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to go on my lining and my opening, and I'm going to go ahead and go all the way in. And I want to make sure that I am, again, pressing those two linings. And again, with my other finger that I pulled it, I'm going to pull my sleeve through. Okay. Then I'm going to stitch. So again, I want to make sure that I am matching my seam. Make sure that your sleeve lining is not twisted inside. There's my notch on my lining and on my sleeve. Make sure those match. So now I want you to go ahead and stitch 5/8 inch all the way around. Don't forget the back stitch at the start and at the end. Make sure that you are putting in this area on your sewing machine and that you are not attaching anything else that shouldn't be attached. So go ahead and stitch in your lining to both of your sleeves. So go ahead and do that now. Makers, so I finished my sleeves, and if you do not care for this way of attaching the lining to your sleeves, I think it's a quick way, but you can also grab needle and thread and just slip stitch. It's also, you know, a quiet, a relaxing way to do it. Slip stitching for me, it's actually very relaxing. And talking about slip stitching, which we are going to be doing some of that. So I want you to go ahead and press the lower hem of your garment, and in the pattern's asking us to turn up again 1/4 inch on the raw edge. I'm not going to do that because again, I don't want any bulk, and this is looking beautiful the way it is. So go ahead and press up your hem, and you want to match this curve from your facing. So go ahead and do that. Once you do that, I want you to slip stitch your lining to your hem. So again, needle and thread and slip stitch by hand all the way through. Once you do that, give it a good press, and afterwards we're going to top stitch. So makers, go ahead and do that now. Makers, now that you slip stitch the lining to your hem on your coat, I want you to top stitch 1/2 inch or 1.3 centimeters away from the edge. Again, go slow, 1/2 inch or 1.3 centimeters, and make sure that when you are top stitching on that hem that you do not catch your lining. You don't want to do that. Once you do that, you can also top stitch the your cuffs, and once you do that, you can turn up your cuff to 2 3/4 centimeter or 6.1 centimeter, and I want you to tack invisibly and a couple of times, again, needle and thread. Once you do that, all you have to do is go ahead and you have a spot for your snaps and go ahead and do those. All right, makers, that is your sew along for this beautiful coat. All right, makers, I hope you enjoyed that sew along. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below. As always, I'm going to be linking the pattern, fabric, lining fabric, and any notions that I used. Don't forget to sign up for a Minerva Craft Club account. You get a discount on all your orders for 12 months. And join us on our website with an account where you can share your makes and get inspiration on any upcoming projects. All right, makers, I will see you next time.